I hope y'all are doing well. So this week we are discussing gender. We are discussing gender in relation to cultural anthropology and how anthropologists understand and define the term. So I am going to share my screen. Let me, okay. So getting into it. It's important to define terms, and the two terms here that need to be defined are gender and sex, because they're two different things. And they have two different understandings and definitions here. So, gender is our attitudes and behaviors associated with and expected of the two sexes. Sexes being male and female. The term sex denotes biology, while gender refers to social role. Sex is a person's biological classification as either male or female. But as I'll get into this, um, sex isn't as concrete as we have previously understood it to be. And what I mean by that is the existence of intersex people. So at birth, you might not just be male or female, and it's not that established binary, even with sex. And so you might also have intersex people who are born with both male and female characteristics. Gender identity is the degree to which an individual sees her or himself as themselves as feminine or masculine. And this can be either, again, viewed in binary terms of female or male, feminine, masculine, or it can be viewed as a spectrum. Um, Cisgender describes an individual whose gender identity aligns with the sex they, he, she was assigned with at birth. This is the opposite of the term transgender. Transgender is and describes an individual who has a gender identity different from conventional ideas about what is female and what is male, or different from the gender assigned at birth. Within this realm, some other important terms to note is non-binary and non-binary people, and gender fluid people, because both terms are present and do arise within multiple cultures, and so it's important to note these. As I noted before, an intersex person is a person whose genitalia, secondary characteristics, hormones, and other physiological features, they're not necessarily male or female. It might be a combination stated differently of both characteristics here. Um, for example, you might have a person who's born with female genitalia but they have male hormones. Or you might have an instance where a person is born with both male and female genitalia. Again, it's usually a combination of either here. And at least 2% of people are intersex. This is the same amount of people who have red hair, right? And so when you're seeing the statistic 2%, that's still a good chunk of the population that is considered intersex here. And also important to note about intersex people is that usually what happens is that the doctor performs the procedure and makes their sex closest to the presenting either male or female, right? And so what usually occurs is that the intersex person does not know that they're intersex for a very long time until they look at their medical records and see inconsistencies within those medical records. And so it is that process that a child and a person goes a very long time without knowing that they're intersex. Um, and that does often occur with intersex people. There are distinctions between males and females. And this, first and foremost, is important to anthropology because it is crucial to gender theorists and early anthropologists' understandings of gender. Was to try to distinguish between males and females. Males and females are distinguished from each other through these are some categories here that they might be distinguished through size and strength. This refers to sexual dimorphism, this particular term. But strength is a very flippant term because it's how you define strength. Are we defining it by upper arm strength? Are we defining it as lower body strength? Uh, it's hard to say because if we're defining strength as upper body strength, that is statistically true that more males are stronger than more females. But if we're defining it in terms of lower body strength, that might skew the statistic a little bit. And so it's how you define certain terms like size and strength here, and in making those distinguishments, in other words. Males and females differ in also reproductive physiology, females being the ones who are able to get pregnant, carry children, and produce milk. Um, Within this realm, you also have social and biological understandings of motherhood and fatherhood. So the social expectations of fatherhood versus the biological understandings of fatherhood, right? And how there's more weight given on these social aspects of fatherhood and more expectations given to being a father and being there and being present in the relation versus the biological aspects of it, where it's not necessarily needed to have the father present, right? In that particular relation, because the mother can continue feeding the child without the need for a father present. Again, anthropologists are simply just highlighting the understandings of fatherhood here, as well as motherhood, culturally speaking and socially speaking. So, according to anthropologists, they do not agree on overall significance of such differences in human cultures. But what is agreed upon is the various cultures construct differences and similarities between males and females other than those based on biological differences. And that is what is seen across cultures, is that we do see a construction of definitions surrounding how males are defined within a given society and culture, and how females are defined within a society and culture. And further, this sort of masculinity and femininity is further constructed within a given culture. So, there are cultural constructions of gender here. The phrase cultural or social construction of gender means that different cultures have distinctive ideas about males and females and use these ideas to define manhood, masculinity, and womanhood, femininity. And these definitions can really get at what males wear, what masculinity is supposed to look like versus what femininity is supposed to look like, what it means to be feminine, right? And that is all culturally tied and socially defined. Genetics and culture both matter in scientific understandings of gender, and that's also an important detail here is that anthropology really further wants to highlight genetic and biological factors, as well as cultural factors, because they weave together oftentimes. Male and female differences can be exaggerated oftentimes in cultures. And these types of societies tend to be patriarchal. And in other societies that we have seen, they tend to be minimized. These differences tend to not really be significant within cultures and societies. Ultimately, it is difficult to determine how much genes can affect gender expression. We haven't really landed on a concrete uh, understanding of this, where I can provide you a concrete answer to this. There are particular gender expectations and roles within a given culture and society. And this includes a set of societal norms that prescribe what is and what is not acceptable behavior for individuals according to their gender. Stated differently, these are a set of norms that prescribe what is acceptable for men to do and prescribe what is acceptable for women to do and further prescribe what is not acceptable for either genders to do. Um, Cultural expectations also gets at how women and men ought to behave within a given society. Now, this ought to behave, right? Might be how they dress themselves, or it might be how men are supposed to act socially. It might get at emotions. So, how women might present an element of emotions versus how men, right, in a given social environment. Or it might even get at how men should interact with other men, right? Versus how women should interact with other women, right? It gets at those types of behaviors that oftentimes are taught. And we often learn about our gender from others. And it's often unspoken, if that makes sense. And so a good example of this, of how men and women ought to behave, right? Women within my society, are expected to shave. And that is an expectation. That for me was taught to me at a very young age. And it was very either overtly clear or the like, right? And so it was something that was expected of me to do for my specific gender. And so that was something that was taught to me. And that was also something that I learned from others how to do, right? Same with men. And anything that we're expected to do within our given gender. Gender roles are patterns of socially defined behaviors and expectations associated with being female or male here. And gender roles can coincide with um, familial roles that's been seen. A good example of gender roles here is the nuclear family role model, where men are expected to leave the home and work, and women are expected to stay at home and raise the kids, right? That might be a gender role and expectation that you might find within a society and culture, but that's not the nuclear family model doesn't show up in every culture and society. And historically it hasn't. You've had societies where both males and females have raised the children. You have societies where both males and females hunted out of necessity for food. And so it's again, it's not consistent and it changes and shifts in each society. I posted this video to Canvas. It's found on YouTube. It's getting at Margaret Mead's research within gender. And further understandings of sexual and gender identity. I highly recommend the video. It's overviewing her research, what she found, as well as just broader understandings of sexual and gender identity within different cultures. So, getting into some case studies, the first one I want to note is the Hua of Papua New Guinea. This is patrilineal. Stated differently, it's mostly centered around men within that society. So very similar to patriarchal in this instance. Oftentimes within a patrilineal society, you have fathers pass down certain property to their sons, often seen in this case. Um, because of this cultural construction, who believe that later in life a woman can become like a man and a man can become like a woman. So within this culture, they not only um, think that there's males and females, but they consider uh, women becoming men and men becoming women as a category of gender here. So new, to further get into this, is a vital essence. Women have more new for this culture than men. And new can be transferred through different processes like food, sexual intercourse, and the like. Men may eat new rich foods and participate in sexual intercourse. Um, Thus, they end up gaining more new over the years and become more like women. On the flip side, because women in this society cook, um, they lose their new, and so they become more like men. And so the Figapa, I hope I'm saying that right, third gender category is men who are like women because their bodies contain lots of substances like the who are symbolically considered feminine. The Kokra is the fourth gender category. These are females who have lost their new and have become more like men. And so here you have four categories of gender within this culture and how they understand it. And they further understand it through an understanding of new here as a vital essence. You also have the Hopi. The Hopi is a matrilineal society as opposed to a patrilineal society. In this, oftentimes within a matrilineal society, you see mothers pass down property to their daughters. And furthermore, you see it more so focused on women in this society, that women hold a lot of the property in this particular society. And that property is passed down, including the name of the family, is passed down through the daughters, oftentimes. This is Native American Hopi. Uh, they are located in northeastern Arizona, recognized 50 exogamous matriclans, now extinct. They are traditionally matrilocal, so men join the extended family household as opposed to women joining that extended family household. Stated differently for matrilocal, it's the it's when the couple gets married and the man in that couple joins the female's family. I hope that makes sense. As opposed to the female joining the man's family. The Hopi men remain part of their mother's lineage and part of their mother's lineage. So this in this society, the mother's lineage is kind of noticed more and held as more important. Living spaces, property, and ceremonious objects are passed down from mother to daughter, as I noted before. And this is just some, I didn't post any pictures, but I did post some pictures of Hopi. They had particular, for the women in the society, they held their hair a particular way. And you also note the particular headdresses that are used and this particular clothing that they wore during this time. North American constructions of gender, you are most likely familiar with, especially if you grow up in the United States. Many North Americans sees females as compassionate, emotional, socially skilled, physically fragile, and family oriented. Males are taken to be more selfish, rational, tolerant of physical discomfort, i.e., tough, coordinated, and individualistic. There is oftentimes within this a binary considered, that women and females are considered drastically different or opposites to men or males. And this is further exacerbated through socialization, where females and males within North American continents are raised a particular way. Raised to play with particular toys, for example, like dolls or trucks and the like here, that further establish their gender construction. Gender segregation can also be found in these particular regions. Um, so women are socialized into nurturing and compassionate jobs like teaching, or nursing, or social work and the like, versus men are socialized in mathematical, outdoor jobs. Um, and so part of that element is toys, right? Toys is a big impact on how children socialize and what that might look like for children. And so if girls are only able to play with soft toys, they aren't really getting anything out of that. They aren't exploring like puzzles and solving anything as more male toys might allow them to do. There are two lessons of acceptance here for anthropologists. So the first one is that we ought to be more like others by tolerating variation, accepting people as individuals whom we value and who can contribute in various ways. And not all peoples in the world require conformity to their society's normative gender roles. So there's no reason to think our intolerance is universal and therefore inevitable. There are four main characteristics of gender variation here. You have cross-gender occupation or work activities. This is a preference for the work of the opposite sex or gender, for work set aside for their third or fourth gender identities. This has been seen in multiple cultures, like Native American culture, where you had trans people doing a particular job within their society, or non-binary people holding a particular position within their society. Um, and this even gets at a certain early cultures even considered people who were two-spirited, as people who directly spoke with the gods. It is almost 4th of July, so that's why you're hearing that. But as I was saying before, certain cultures held that two-spirited people, non-binary people, were able to directly speak to the gods, and thus they could even prophesy something. And so that remains to be seen within early cultures of society, and it's important to note that history. Transvestitism is an older term. In most cultures, a dress style different from the style of men and women, most commonly cross-dressing, but sometimes a combination of female and male garments. It is that practice that you might see in particular cultures, and it might be something that even becomes popular, right? Like the aspect of drag queens and drag kings. That's something that even becomes part of culture, especially in the United States and the like. Something like that could even become popular, as pop culture. Then you have associations with spiritual powers. This is what I mentioned before. Granting of special powers derived from spiritual forces, often combined with a personal experience interpreted by the group as a calling. And then same-sex relationships. This is the formation of sexual and emotional bonds with members of the same sex. To further get into this, this was, for example, seen in the Native American culture where more masculine women, or considered more masculine women, were able to date and marry other women within their society. And that was also seen with more feminine men being able to date other men within that given society. And so anthropologists, sociologists, and the like tend to understand gender as fluid. So these practices or customs are often called, oh, I don't think that's supposed to be in the slide. As I was saying before, I don't know why that's in the slide. Oh well, whatever. Um, but for sociologists and anthropologists, they understand gender as fluid, something that can change or fluctuates depending on certain elements of society, in other words. And so, from this gender fluidity, we see multiple gender identities. And this is further proof of how gender can be fluid, right? And how gender has been seen as fluid historically speaking. So, many cultures offer third gender options. Some people define a third or even a fourth gender of man, woman, woman, man, or not woman, not man, half woman, some other indigenous ways to translate that, in other words. So, you have two-spirited people, you have the Hijra. This is a diverse group in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Pakistan who identify as neither male or female. The Hijra tend to group together in their own subculture. They tend to stick together because they're highly ostracized within their society. Um, then you also have Navajo in the four gender system. You have male, female, male with female essence, and female with male essence. So, part of Navajo culture and Native American culture more broadly, to further get into it, right? If you are to further understand four gender system or two spirits, oftentimes it's something that's described as spoken to the individual at a very young age. And so a lot of Native American people, when they talk about identifying as third two-spirited or um, male with female essence, usually what they will say is that they were spoken to by two spirits, a male spirit and a female spirit, and they have felt this way for a very long time. And they express that. So, getting into it, um, the preferred modern term is two spirits. This is derived from Siwan language phrase referring to persons who had both female and male spirits. Um, and I have a quote here to kind of help further understand this. Um, this is, I think I pulled this from the textbook. I should have included the page number. Anyways, the quote goes, a Crow family adopted a girl who came to be known as Woman Chief during the 19th century. Like boys, she hunted deer and bighorn sheep while growing up. When the men who raised her were killed, she took responsibility for the family, acting as both the mother and the father. Later in life, she helped save her camp from an attack by the Blackfoot and went on horse raiding parties. Eventually, Woman Chief took four wives and participated in council deliberations and her band, a role usually reserved for men. And so this is a historically accurate. It is of a girl, woman chief. And this is another example of gender fluidity as seen throughout history and what that is has exactly looked like. Okay, I think this is the last one. If you're so curious, this is a very brief documentary. I think it's like I'm trying to remember correctly. I think it's less than 20 minutes long, uh, about a trans woman's experience fitting in within her own society and culture. Very interesting. It's informative. So if you're curious to watch it, feel free to watch it. Um, but that's is that it for this lecture? Oh, last to note. Then it's it for the lecture. Okay. So, last to discuss here is cultural sexism and violence because that something like violence can also be gendered. And so there are two ways in which the culture of society perpetuates the subordination of an individual or group based on the classification of the individual or group. This includes gender-based violence. Um, Gender-based violence is any harm that is perpetuated against a person because of the power inequalities based on gender roles. Part of gender violence includes something like honor killings. These are murders, often public, as a result of, when you're talking about gender-based violence, you're mostly looking at violence against women within particular cultures and societies, or violence against feminine appearing people. It's also important to note. Um, and so take that in consideration when considering these terms and these statistics. Honor killings are murders often public as a result of a female dishonoring or being perceived as dishonored her family or community. These are meant to be public. It's something that is considered an honorable thing to do within a given society and culture. It's very close to bride burnings and the like. That is also public, where if a female is viewed as being dishonorable, she'll be set on fire by either her own family or the man she was to be married, their family. Um, and again, it's meant to be public. It's meant to be a public display. Um, to send a message, oftentimes, within this type of society. Then you have dowry killings. This is the killing of a woman by her husband and in-laws when she or her family are unable to give money or valuables to her husband's parents. Dowry killings are very complex. Oftentimes, dowry killings really affect lower income, poverty-stricken females and their families because usually they are so desperate to get married off that they will form any relationship at that point. And so it often puts females within these societies in a very vulnerable position. It puts women in these societies in a very vulnerable position. And then femicide. Femicide is the killing of women and girls targeted because of their gender. And different types of femicide. So when you're looking at femicide, statistically speaking, there is a higher likelihood of women being killed by their spouses and husbands, and people who they are close to than being killed by strangers. That's also an important statistic note about femicide. Um, okay, it's not a very light note to end it on. I apologize. But you have a discussion due this week. You have midterm next week. So, um, all right, I'll end it there. Let me stop share. Oh, my head's cut off. Okay. All right. I'll See you next week. Bye.